Good morning, everybody. How you doing, Joe?
Good.
Okay,
How are
I
you?
wasn't sure the sound and everything was working. We got stuck in the green room without really the option to talk to each other. So good that everything worked out. So
We're
yeah,
live.
say it again.
We're live.
Oh yeah, we are live. Oh yeah, I should have started with that. What a bad host.
I'm slightly under the weather, but I didn't want to miss this. So
Really
just know
appreciate
that
that.
I'm not at 100% energy.
Okay, no, I really appreciate you still were able to come up today. So this is the second episode of No Code Interviews. We did one last month. Sorry, it's a monthly live stream. So last month was with Sean Montgomery, the CEO and founder of Zano, which is a no-code backend solution, plugs into not only DraftBit but any other kind of front end. And this month, I'm super excited, Joe, that you accepted my invitation. So Joe is the founder and CEO of Universe, and we're gonna go into much more detail about what Universe is for those who don't know. Um, Before we do that, just a quick intro. So as I already said, like this is a monthly event. This is part of the No Code Friends Twitch channel. So we're broadcasting live on the Twitch channel. For those also who don't know, No Code Friends is actually a very big kind of no code community. I believe it's the largest community, a no code community in the world with about 5,000 members. Nobody so far has corrected me every time I say that, so I'm gonna just assume it gotta be true. But
Classic move.
yeah, right. You just no, but seriously, the community is very active on Slack, and with Twitch now, they have like more than one, like multiple events every day. So if you are francophone, if you do speak French, I highly recommend. And if you're interested in no code, I highly recommend you check those guys out. And so, with that said, today we have a 1 hour in front of us. What I kind of wanted to get out of this conversation are a few things. I wanted to touch on not only the product itself, so Universe. We're going to talk a lot about that, and then ideally also touch on the company that you've created and how the company run and what are the different kind of dynamic there. And finally, saving that for the end, we'll see if that's a mistake. But I kind of want to talk about the very interesting part, which is yourself. Like personally, like how do you come up? You came up with Universe. How was that whole kind of journey? So, with that said, if that works for you, Joe, I would like to just start writing and talk about the product itself. How does that sound?
Sounds awesome.
Okay, sweet. Um, so I can just give a little. So Universe is a website, no code website builder, but I feel like that definition does not do it justice. And so I kind of want to hear how do you go these days typically about presenting what Universe is to people who don't know it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it on the head. Universe is an app that lets anyone build a website from their phone, but there are many different ways one can do that, and the way that we do it is very different than anyone else. And that what might come to mind when I say that. So Universe is about a radical idea, which is that everyone who uses the internet should be able to build the internet. And because most of us use the internet on mobile devices, on touch based devices, we should be creating the internet on those devices. So this sounds great. Like, okay, yes, theoretically, everyone who uses the internet should be able to create it. But how do you do that? How do you make that possible? And how do you make it possible in a creative and generative way where people are creating in their own way and not within very tightly defined bounds from the platform?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we've done is we invented a new interface that's based on a grid system. And our grid system is simultaneously extremely easy to use to design the kind of site that you want, but it's also super powerful. And so it's easy enough for anybody who knows how to use a smartphone to build a site within minutes. But it's sophisticated enough and it rewards discovery and curiosity such that you can go down the rabbit hole and build something that's never been built before. So traditional website builders, not only are they desktop oriented, but they're template designed,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the chassis of the site that you're interacting with and manipulating is hard coded. Like you cannot break those walls, so to speak. Whereas on Universe, every single template, and we have hundreds, are built on the same chassis, right? So you can go from any one design to any other design. And so in a way, Universe is a website builder, but it's also a design tool, and it's also a development tool, and it's also a business building tool because we have our own, commerce system and
Mm-hmm.
inventory management system. It's also a way of getting a domain and managing your audience, building a mailing list. So it is both a radical new tool that enables people to be creative and build a business and a presence online in a totally new way. Um, but it's also a one-stop shop for all the things you need to manage your presence online.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the commonality, the thing that's most important is the things that we do are done in a certain way. There is a universe way of doing things, and it is playful and easy, but also sophisticated and powerful. And that's true about our grid editor, and it's true about our business building tools and our audience building tools as well.
Yeah. I wanted you to tell me a little bit more about that grid because I really user of Universe, and when I my experience with Universe has been really interesting, and like I think a lot of tools out there from a marketing point of view promote themselves as like, it's something you can do XYZ in like a minute, or you can do XYZ in 10 minutes or just 1 hour, and it usually is true from a technical point of view, but it might not be the case that the user will want to do that or should do that. And I feel like with Universe it's been very different because those tools usually say that also don't necessarily encourage that behavior as well as you guys do. So my experience with Universe has been like really in a minute. Not only I wanted to get to the end goal, which is now I have my website, and so I launch the app, I do the onboarding, I understand the grid in about 30 seconds, which is something I want to get into because that's mind blowing for me from a product design decision point of view. And then very quickly I don't know. It's a sign of a good design because I don't know what you do to make me do that, but very quickly I felt directed towards like, okay, now I want to publish something. And
Yeah.
so you did not distract me. Only later did I realize, oh, there's multiple, part. I can go see my audience. I can go see all those like, if a lot of plugins and things like that. But like your flow is very intentional, it feels. So I can only assume you've put a lot of effort and time into that. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of your intention for that first user experience on
Yeah,
your platform?
100%. Look, I mean, building a website, when I say that to someone, the typical reaction is something like, "Oh, I need to do it. I need to build a website." But it's exasperation, it's dread. It's not something people want to do. So people are bringing a lot of baggage when it comes to, "Oh, I need to build a website," and that's
Mm-hmm.
because they either know the technical part of building a website, so writing it by hand, or they've used other products in the space, or they've been too scared to even try any of them because of the sort of seeming problem. And so everything about universe needs to counteract that mindset, right? It's not even whether it's true or not. That's the perception that most people bring to this process. And one of the ways that we do that is we make the product super fun and playful and something that you want to do. But another way that we do it is that we introduce this idea that putting a draft into the world is easy and shipping something is better than shipping nothing. That's
Mm-hmm.
something that in the startup world we've come to internalize around the iterative mindset. But I think it's a good idea in a more broad sense, which is to say, put something out there. Don't worry if
Mm-hmm.
it's not perfect, put it out there. And so we've designed the product around that. And for us, we say the first thing you need to put on the world into the world is sort of a hello world landing page. It's your homepage. Like, don't worry about thinking about the full skeleton or the navigation of your site. Don't worry about building your inventory management system. Don't worry about setting up exactly your domain. Just get something online and you can iterate it from there. And we've designed the product in that way. At Universe, one of our core values is the idea of Kaizen, which in Japanese means continuous improvement. And, that idea, that spirit of, having grand aspirations and a grand vision, but being willing to be very short term oriented in how you get there and nimble and reactive and casual about it is what we're trying to impart with the product itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's really the spirit of it. And then, I'd say in general, the animating like design principle is start with how the thing looks and then explore how it works. What I mean by that is, you know, if you take something like Shopify or another commerce system and you want to set up your Shopify store, the first thing that you do is you start to build your product inventory. You put together your bank account information. You
Mm-hmm.
choose if there are small, mediums, and larges of that t-shirt. Like you're configuring the skeleton, the database of that business and that website. With Universe, it's the opposite. You start by choosing the background of the site. You start by adding a picture of your t-shirt. And then when you want to sell it, you add a block to your site, sell block, and you choose a price and you choose a name. And then if you want, you can add sizes to that product, but you don't need to.
Mm.
And then you publish and it's live and anyone could buy that thing. You've never even put in your bank account information. So the question is, like, why do we do it that way? Well, because we don't need your bank account information for you to make a sale. We only need your bank account information if you want to get paid out.
Right.
But that's a stumbling point. So many people fall out, before they ever get to that. So our jobs as the designer of this tool is to minimize those parts and also to minimize the parts that are not energy giving, right? Because in the
Mm.
beginning of bringing a thing into the world, it requires a lot of activation energy. And our job is to facilitate that as smoothly as possible because new ideas are very fragile. We're in a very vulnerable place when we want to bring those ideas into the world. And so, what our task is as the platform is to make that hurdle lower and do everything in our power to help give form to your idea. Because, one out of every 10,000 ideas or less actually makes it into the world. And like
Right.
we believe fundamentally that like there should be more ideas in the world
Mm-hmm.
and that will be better for that. So that's really the core principle at hand.
So, in the spirit of iteration that you want your user to embrace, what was your guys' kind of iterative process with that whole flow? Like, you didn't. Am I wrong to think you didn't start with the grid, or did you? Like, what was the kind of early evolution of the product?
Yeah, well, Universe really has had two lives. Um, it had a life before it was a website builder. And it was the same vision and mission, which is to empower everyone to build the internet. But when I first started thinking about this stuff, the solution wasn't a website builder. This is, 2015 or so. It was, okay, we're going to make a new creation tool for mobile that will allow you to create visual things and interactive things. And those things will exist, inside of this new network. That was the original idea.
Mm-hmm.
If I look back at the time, really what I was doing was R&D for interface design. How can you create a user interface that was both very easy for someone who has no experience designing or developing, but also flexible and open-ended so one can make something totally original and unique. And it took a while to actually get to the grid UI. The first UI I tried was a freeform canvas where you had all options. The
Mm.
second option was a totally templatized system where you were tweaking, variables but didn't have control over the structure. Both of those fell flat. Right, the open-ended one was too intimidating and didn't make sense for a mobile form factor. There's too many possible decisions,
Right.
and the template was frustrating because you couldn't make anything
Too limited.
original.
Mm-hmm.
And so the grid system emerged from that when I was trying to reconcile those two things. And, I have a bit of a background in graphic design. And really, if you look at any organized field of design, they sort of, coalesce towards grid systems. Whether it's graphic design, architecture, product design, even in three dimensions, we impose grid systems. If you think about what a grid system is, it's really a narrowing of the decision space. So instead of having universal choice as the designer, we're reducing the scope of choice so that you can put something in that column or this column and not at any point in between. And creating that grid it unlocks like a freedom to think at a higher level. And so we took the same principle here, but just turned it way up. So instead of it being, a 12 column grid, it's a 3-column grid. So launched this sort of experimental social network product around the grid system. It never really worked, but I knew that the paradigm was really compelling of the grid system, needed to figure out how to make it useful, pivoted into becoming a website builder. And then at that moment, the original version of the tool had the grid system, but it was just a single page site that you can build. And the site didn't even scroll. And we only offered 4 blocks that you could add to your site. So text, photos, links.
Mm.
We've been pulling the thread ever since then. We did YC in 2018. And for the past 3 years, we've really been expanding what's possible with our system. And now you can build any kind of site, including a store, and we've got 20 different kinds of blocks, and you could have scrolling pages, and we continue to push out what is possible with it. And the way I look at this is like, we're building a system for creation on the internet, and this creation system is analogous to an operating system. An operating systems for using a computer, creation systems for creating with a computer. There are other creation systems, right? Like if you take the code stack, that is a creation system. But I would contend that the internet is still in its infancy when we come to thinking about how we build on it. And there was a point in time where if you wanted to use a computer, you needed to write code to use the computer. So if you bought a computer in 1980, to use it, you would need to write code on a command line, right? That's how it worked. And then in 1984, Apple comes out with the Mac, and with it, the first graphical user interface, a GUI. And the GUI used a mouse, and it had a desktop metaphor, and it changed the world, and it changed how we thought about computers as something that you needed a program to use to something that everyone could use. And now, even programmers use a graphical user interface, right? Like most of the time. Right, 99.9999% of usage on a computer is through a GUI.
Right.
The internet is still pre-GUI. We're still pre-GUI, and the aspiration universe is to build the first true graphical user interface for creating the internet. And if you consider the evolution of operating systems and how long Mac OS, for example, has been in development, 40 years, this is a decades-long project, and in the fullness of time, anything that's possible with the internet should be creatively possible with our system. That's sort of how we see it at a big picture.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I want to just add one comment about what you say through this response, and then I have another question about some of your features. So not only, I think that grid, as you explained, is a very interesting paradigm, but I want to emphasize for people who are maybe either listening to this or who haven't seen or experienced the specific universe grid, is that the execution of it is also impeccable. Like I've been using it, and those moments where you look at something and like you don't even have to think of how to use it, right? That grid, those buttons, I click on it and I get it in like literally 2 seconds. And then go one step further, which is really the point I want to make, is that you've even been able to know what I'm thinking of, meaning like I see those rows and I want to delete a row, and just by like selecting the like all of the little like blocks in that row, then you surface that option to like delete the entire row. And it sounds silly and it's hard to explain visually, obviously, in a video format or like an interview format like this one. But like I've noticed a few of those little execution details who really think like you've been iterating and pushing that interaction for a while. So really want to like congratulate you on that, because as a user, it's amazing to see that.
Thank you. I mean, it's always awesome to hear that it's recognized. We know that it comes through. But it's not the kind of thing that you see when you look at your analytics.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why I'm like, at DriveBeat, we experienced some of those similar things. Like, it's hard to prioritize those things as well. Like, it's hard to be like, this is an important feature because like, it's not the most seen or the most used. But anyway, I wanted to ask you a little bit about feature in the context of pricing. So can you walk me a little bit through how you've been thinking of pricing? I know you've been mostly using that as a way to limit or restrict the access to certain feature. How do you even, and I'm not talking so much about the number itself, but just how do you go about thinking about pricing in general?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that this is an area where we have a lot of work to do still. So our basic approach, and this won't change, is that Universe is a freemium tool, meaning you can use it for free. And our mission at a high level is to empower everyone to build the internet, which means that we need to have a free version. There are some people and there are some use cases that just don't, they don't have the ability to pay. And we want to support, that usage. Mm-hmm. But we also are a subscription powered business. We think that's really important because we have a direct relationship with our customer, and we are paid to make our tool better. Whereas, if you have an indirect business model like ads,
Right.
then there's an antagonistic relationship inherent to that between the user and the platform. So our approach is basically like, how do we draw that line where we know that someone has the means to pay? And for us, that's often a commercial use case. So if you're using a website for a business that's making money, then you should pay for Pro. And the way that we think about pricing there is to say, like, what is the value that we're delivering, for our customers? Right now, we have a single Pro subscription tier that will change likely over time as we sort of stratify and be more precise with what you get access to. But the cool thing is that you can make a totally free site that includes access to almost all blocks, unlimited content. You could even sell things for free. But if you want a custom domain, if you want to remove the banner on the site that says
The
created
branding,
on Universe, if you want advanced analytics, if you want better economics on your sales, those are things you upgrade for. And so, yeah, that's sort of how we think about it.
Okay. I was curious about that lifetime subscription. It's not something we see a lot of places. I thought it was a kind of interesting touch to really think of like a user in very, very, very long term, which is good. But we don't have to go too deep into that. I want to mention there's also a chat as part of this live stream. So there's a couple of people joining and putting comments. So I'll try to keep an eye on that. If people have questions, feel free to put it there. One person Alex asked like, what am I building on Universe? And so far it's only been just a personal website. So I did like a gduverger.onuniverse.com. Is that the address? Yeah, it is. So yeah, something very simple, but check it out. It's kind of just examples. The kind of following up on that pricing question, like, then what would you define as like your ideal customer? Like who's your audience, and like what's good for you and what's good for them? Like what's a good audience for you, regardless of if that's the audience that you're getting right now?
Our audience clusters into three areas. One is what we call sort of creators. So these are people who make things for a living, and that's their passion, whether they're musicians or artists or chefs or writers or designers, and they want to represent themselves, their work online, and they want to do it in their own way. Universe is amazing for them. And the second cluster, and that includes influencers and people who have big followings in social. The second cluster is what we call upstart brands. So these are people who also make things, but they often make physical goods and things that they're selling to the world. And that could be, a new streetwear brand. It could be a jewelry line. It could be a new, someone who's painting sneakers, like that kind of thing. And then the final bucket is sort of everything else, because the product is so broad in its use case. That could be everything from a personal site for someone like you to, a realtor making their presence, or local business, or designer showing their portfolio, something like that. So those are really like the three clusters for us. When we focus, creators, upstart brands, those are really the commonalities. I think more than that, in terms of the use cases, we think a lot about who is our customer at a qualitative level. And these are people who they make stuff like at a high level. Like they're not often retailing someone else's products. They're or showing off someone else's work. Like they are creating something new, and they want a presence to show that with the world. They're also people who don't work at a desk primarily, right? They're out in the world. They're people who want to look awesome. They want to look great on the internet, and they want to do that in their own way. And they're people who are hungry. They want to put their mark on the world. They want to do something they haven't yet done, and they're ambitious, and they're idealistic, and they're creative, and they want to put their dent in the universe. And so that's really who our product is for.
Yeah. Did that change over time? The people you're targeting are people who respond well to the offering? did it used to be different, or
I'd
as it
say the big
was?
thing that's changed is really just the addition of brands and commerce as a
Mm,
core leg of the stool. Like we only introduced commerce last year to Universe, and so it's a relatively new thread for us. And even still, the commerce offering has grown. When we first shipped it, it was just take a transaction on your site. So you put in a dollar amount, but there was no inventory, there was no shipping or fulfillment, there was no shopping cart. So we've continued to pull that thread, and as we've done that, we've seen more businesses effectively gravitate towards what we're doing. Um, so that's been probably the biggest change.
yeah, that's interesting. I think of our experience at Drivebait, and it's definitely has been part of our journey to find the right audience for the tool. And I think a lot of the maybe most recent no-code tools have to go through that because it's a balance between like, do you want to bring technical people to like empower them to go further, or do you want to bring people who don't have technical skills, and where do you sit in that spectrum? I personally don't think that it's broken down as people tend to make it sound like it's a no code or a pro code kind of thing, and I think it's more of a spectrum. But where do you sit on that spectrum is something we've had to deal with. So it feels like you're more, from what I've heard from you from past interviews and things like that, that you're more on the touching people who don't necessarily have a tech background, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been thinking about no code for way longer than there was sort of an industry around it.
Yeah, no terms
But the
for
way
it.
of thinking about it really is like code is an interface. Code is an interface. It's the way I think about it, what is an interface? Imagine a hammer in your mind, right? The hammer has the part that strikes the nail and it has the part that you grip with your hand. The interface is the part that you grip with your hand, right? Like the power is coming from the part that strikes the nail, but the way that you grab it is the handle, and it's only useful to a human with a handle. Like a hammer without a handle is useless. So the way of thinking about code is that it's the handle, but it's actually like a pretty terrible handle for most things. Like there are some things that it's actually really great with. Particularly, it's really great for novel things that have never before been done. Like things that literally in the history of software have never been done. Like software, code is an incredibly good interface for that because it, in its nature, has an unlimited possibility space. But actually, most of the things that we want to do on the internet are not that. Most of them fit within a more narrow band. And so for those things, we should have interfaces that are more human, that map to what we want to do and how. So for us, there's no coding in Universe. We do have a code block that lets you paste and embed, but like that's not the future. Like, like by the way, even things like introducing logic and dynamic types of data, those are things you're going to be able to do without code on Universe. Like, code is very rarely the right interface for a thing. Now that is true for people who've never coded, but it's
Right.
also true for people who have coded or know how to code. Like we did some user interviews last week, and one of the interesting things was that like a couple of folks we chatted with had built websites by hand before, but they prefer to do it with Universe because it's way better. It's way more fun. It's way easier. Like, why would you want to write code if you have a choice in a way? And the other thing is that the problem with code is that when you're writing code, you're thinking about construction. You're thinking about how can I make this thing as best as I can, but that implies that you know what this thing should be. Whereas it means that you have a fixed design. But the truth is that a lot of the process of creating things is actually an interplay between the design process, or what do I want to make, and the execution process, the craft of construction, right? When you are coding, you're in the execution phase. There's a lot of creativity involved in that because you're figuring out how to execute a design, but you're still within the execution phase. If you think about a painter, the painter is constantly negotiating between design and execution. They have an idea in their mind, they put it on the paper. They have an idea in their mind, put it on the paper. They see what the painting is shaping up to be, and then that changes their idea, and they have a new idea, and they respond to it. And so there's this sort of dance between the creative process and the execution of it. Code doesn't allow for that by its nature. And oftentimes you have two different people doing it. You have a designer and you have a developer, and they're stratified. With Universe, you're building it and designing it at the same time. There's no sort of delineation between those two things, and that allows people to come into the editor without having an idea in their mind of what they want, and then to figure it out as they go. That's a way better approach, in my opinion, for how to do this stuff. Um, so yeah,
What about the playing devil's advocate here a little bit?
yeah,
But what about the approach of um, the technical limitation almost kind of informing things you can do and things you can't, like almost helping you think through the process. So like the example is the architect, like knowing your material, knowing physics, knowing all of that makes you a better architect, right? If it's just about
yeah.
building the house, you might be missing something. How do
I
you
think that's true. I mean, I think that constraint. I mean, we talked earlier about how important constraints are, and I think there's also an honesty in the materials, right? Like you want to do things that the material wants you to do. Um, I think that is true for some use cases of the technology, but not for most. Most people, when they're building a website, they want to build a website. They don't care about what the computer
Right.
wants. They care about what they want. It's our job to build a platform that works in a way that's honest to the material, and exposes that in a helpful and smart way to the creator. And if you want to go lower in the stack, then sure, yeah, like you can do that. But that's only if you have a specific agenda around that.
Right.
So I don't think like if you think about even from an architect's perspective, architect is not doing physics. Like they're dealt a set of constraints that the physical world presents. They're not reconstituting all of physics every time they build a building.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So because your audience or part of your audience is people who don't necessarily have technical knowledge, how do you go about, or how do you think of educational content? Like I know you guys produce a lot of tutorial and guide and videos and all of that, and some of it is in the builder, some of it is outside. Like what's your approach to that? Where do you put the limit? How much should a user need those? Like why do you even put anything there? Like what are your thoughts around like content
Yeah, I
like
mean, I
that?
think education is really important. I think there's really like two kinds of education at a high level with a product like ours. One is like how to do something, and the other is what to do. Like we take it for granted that one knows what to do. That's not true. Like, what should a website
Interesting.
look like? Like, what should it show? Like, and I think that both of these are really important. So, guidance on design, so to speak, or strategy, and guidance on execution. Ultimately, when it comes to execution, the tool itself should be as good as it possibly can be, meaning it should speak for itself, right? Like, it shouldn't require a manual. But sometimes you want to reward a depth and like like here's how you do something that's a little less obvious. And that kind of discovery, I think, is natural for an open-ended tool. Like if you take something like Photoshop guides, like that's probably a little overkill. Like to figure out how you do anything in Photoshop, you kind of need to learn how to do it. But like the more challenging, interesting, alchemical kinds of things, right? Like those kinds of things, there's value in the education when it comes to execution. And then I think on figuring out what you want to build, I think that's another part as well. And I think that there's plenty of room for us playing a leadership role in showing what's possible with the tool. Now, that's not just about videos. It's also about templates. 90+% of the people who use Universe start with a template.
Oh, really? Wow.
And yeah, and those templates don't only serve the function of, oh, here's a great design. It shows you what you can do with the tool. So, for example, like I'm sure you're familiar with these link in bio type sites where you have a site that has a bunch of links to places on the internet. That is one small use case of what's possible with Universe. But you might not know that you could do that with our tool. And so
Right.
it's incumbent on us as the designers of the platform to expose that use case. That in and of itself is a form of education. and is how we think about it too. And by the way, I think we can do a lot more of this, so it's going to be a big area for us going forward as well.
It's very interesting. I'm gonna take a lot of learnings from that because this kind of distinction between like the execution and also inspiring people, showing them what's possible, is something we at Rabbit, but a lot of company could definitely do a better job at. It's a good point of view. How do you so those users who come to you with the use case of like I want to express myself, I want to build a website, I want to sell something. What's the kind of landscape right now for them, and not just in terms of who are your competitors, but like what are their options if they don't know, if they don't discover universe, like what do people typically do?
I think a lot of people are frustrated and they use their Instagram as their primary presence. There are other people who might try something like Linktree for a very narrowly defined use case. There are people who use a Squarespace or Wix or Shopify. What we see though is that if you add up all the customers from all of the existing website builders, you're talking about, paying customers probably less than 10 million total in the whole industry. This is like a multi-$100 billion industry already. There are 5 billion people using the internet. So 10 million, site creators on these platforms, 5 billion users. There's a lot of room to grow, and our ambition is to power the 5 billion. And everyone that has an Instagram profile, every business that has an Instagram profile should have a website, and we want to be that.
Yeah. All right. And I kind of want to be conscious of time, so I'm very curious to hear a little bit more. Hear you talk more about the company itself. So beyond the company, behind the product.
Great.
So we talked a little bit about the origin story, but I'm curious to know. Can you tell us a little bit about where you guys are right now? Like, what's the size of the team? Can you give us a sense of like scales in that regard?
Yeah, totally. So we've grown a lot over the past 18 months. We're now a team of 35. We're mostly in the United States, but we're totally distributed and have been from day one, pre-COVID. So we think of ourselves as an internet company in the truest sense of that word, meaning we exist on the internet. Our office is Slack and Zoom and Notion, and we are really good at operating, without a physical office. In fact, we think we're better than most physical companies.
How do you do that? How do you go about it? How do you get good at it?
Well, it starts with people. Ultimately, it's about having people who are committed to that goal and want to build not just a great product, but a great company together. And what I found is that ultimately, these are people who do not just want, but they thrive in environments with space and freedom. And they have their own, initiative. And so I think that ultimately, like, that's the key thing. It's like attracting and winning folks who are internally driven and who do this because they want to do it. It sounds like a very basic thing, but is not actually true, I think, in a lot of contests. And then setting folks up for success. I'd say that our iterative mindset of Kaizen is not just true about the product, it's true about the company. So even things like, what meetings do we have? We constantly revisit that. Like, we have 2 all hands a week right now. We have one on Monday, one on Friday. But like, we've changed the times around on those. We'll update them as we get larger. Like, we're constantly iterating it. Nothing is fixed. Nothing's permanent. Some things work for a certain amount of time, and then they don't work anymore, and you phase them out. We're I would say a very sort of thoughtful and engaged group of people. So if someone has an idea, they'll write it out and they'll have an audience, and people will engage with that. We're 35 people. We probably have 300 channels on Slack. So what that means is, like, we are methodical about like creating surfaces for discussion and ideas. And we get together every so often. We actually got together as soon as it was safe in August. We got together as a team in Colorado, and that was amazing. So using the physical world and in-person interactions when it's useful for us and when it's advantageous, but not that being the default. So
Right. Because you guys studied in New York, right? Is that correct? In
yeah,
like
so I'm based in New York.
2015,
I'm
you're
based in
based
New
in New
York,
York.
but we
Okay.
have like 6 or 7 people in New York, so it's less. It's like 20% of the team is here.
Okay. So do you have an office in New York? Do you guys still meet beside like COVID, obviously? But
So Ryan, who is our CTO and the first person to join me as we were becoming a website builder, is based in Greenville, South Carolina. So bringing Ryan on was really a step that we were going to build a distributed company. We were going to build an internet
mm,
first company. And so every decision we've made after that has been downstream of that core sort of architectural decision. We do have a space in New York, but I'm not there right now. This is my home office. We have people who go in on a regular basis, but it's an opt-in space. It's there if you want it, and
right.
it's there if people want to, gather here, because they want to work through something in person or whatever it is. So recently, the design team got together in New York for a week. But it's basically, allowing these in-person experiences to work for us as opposed to the inverse where we're working for it.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm curious about is I think I was in New York about the same time as you started the company, or like 20, I was in
Yeah.
2010 for about 10 years, and you guys started in 2015, something like that, 2017. So I've spent a good amount of time in the New York like tech scene, and I'm curious to hear from your point of view now that you've been going through that like remote process. Do you still see value for new companies to like be started in New York? Like if you had to start another company, would you like go somewhere in the wood and be entirely remote as you are right now, or is there still value out of it, out of the city?
I think it depends. I mean, I really think that there's no one size fits all model. I think it's about the people and the problem. So if you're building something that requires folks to be co-located, like you're building something physical, then that can make sense. Also, like personalities matter. Like,
Mm,
I know founders who really crave working shoulder to shoulder in person with their collaborators, and so they should build companies that way. Like, it's really a preference thing.
yeah.
So I don't think there is a one size fits all model. I would say that building an internet company, an internet first company, takes advantage of all the things that the internet's amazing at.
Mm,
So we're having this conversation over the internet. You're in France, right? Like, we have an employee in Spain, right? Like, we couldn't do that in a prior world. And there's so much incredible talent all over the world that we want on our team, right? So like we get access to that, which is really like a straightforward unlock. But also, there's different cultures that are good. Like, we have a bunch of folks in the South, and we have a bunch. We have people in California, and we have people in New York, and we have people in Texas and the Pacific Northwest, and there's all regional cultures there that are
mm-hmm.
valuable. And so, Universe has a universal aspiration, right? Like, we want to reflect that diversity. But the other thing that's amazing about the internet is that it's all software. So, and software, you can do magical things with, right? So you can augment your creative process using software. You can, keep a record of every meeting you've ever had. You can, do an all hands twice a week, for a short amount of time, because the cost of doing it is not that heavy. But if you were in person, getting physically the whole company together is a big lift, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So I think we're just scratching the surface of how you can augment the experience of building a company using software. And so to me, it's like the difference between analog and digital, right? Like, we still have, like if you think about music, you've got a band playing live, you have physical analog media like a record, and you have
Mm-hmm.
Spotify and streaming, right? Like, these things all coexist. We still have concerts, we still have vinyl, and
Right.
we have shop at Spotify. But Spotify has some incredible powers, which is that you can listen to any song at any moment in time. That's pretty cool. So the way I think about company building is that it should be a superset of all of those tools. You should be able
Mm-hmm.
to engage in person when you want, but then you should leverage all the capabilities of the internet when that's the best thing for it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that answer. I think you really nailed it here. Also, I realized I forgot to mention I'm actually in Boston, so it's even
Oh,
to your point.
oh,
Like you in no, but you in New York. I'm in Boston, and we're doing a live stream for a French community. So like we, it's really
exactly.
like everywhere. It's really good. I'm a original software engineer now. I'm head of product at DriveBit. So I'm very curious to understand how you guys deal with product management. Like, what's the day to day, or like what's the flow inside the company? Where do ideas come from? Like, what kind of like processes do they go through, or maybe none? Like, how do you guys work internally?
Yeah. So the product team is probably our newest team. It's small but mighty. It's led by Ryan, our CTO, and a guy named Dan Duncan, who is actually a universe creator that we got
Nice.
in touch with. But product at Universe is ultimately a synthesis function. It takes a bunch of different inputs and it helps us make sense of those inputs and then figure out what we want to go do. And then once we figure that out, go and execute it at a really high level. That's ultimately what product is at this company. And so, what are those inputs? Well, we've got our own vision. Where do we want to take this thing? What is our vision? We have what our creators and our customers are asking for, and we get inundated with feedback on a
I
daily
bet.
basis.
Yeah.
Like, can you do this? And by the way, that's a blessing. A lot of companies, like, you don't really get that much. Like, literally every single day we get tons of requests, so we have to make sense of that. We have our business goals, our growth goals and our business goals.
Mm-hmm.
And we have what our team surfaces up as ideas. So there's a number of different inputs. Not to say like bugs, and also just maintenance and improvements and things
Right,
like
right, right.
that. And so what we do is we collect everything. So we collect all of these inputs from our support channels, from our community, from our team, from what the data is telling us, our business objectives and our vision. And then we synthesize those things and we rank them based on what our priorities are for a given amount of time. I think one of the things as we grow up is being able to do two things at the same time, right? Or more than two things at the same time. And not, just being able to work on one thing. That's what we'll be doing over time. So, for example, we should never stop iterating our grid system. It should always be getting better.
Mm.
A year ago, that wasn't true. Like, if we're working on the grid system, we're not working on, our commerce tools so being able to go multi-threaded is a big unlock for us.
Interesting.
But yeah, that's how we think about it.
Do you do that by breaking down into sub teams and like every team own kind of a specific area, or how do you go about that
We are not
multi-threading?
there yet. We're still figuring it out. We're still figuring out how we organize ourselves around this. But right now we're pretty agile, and we move around as a team as needed.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say this is an area of improvement for us.
So maybe I don't know how much you can share with us, but like, can you give us a sense of what that roadmap is for you guys? Like, what are the big challenges or projects you have on the horizon?
I just say at a high level, we are a tools company. Universe is a tools company. We make three kinds of tools. We make creation tools, we make commerce tools, and we make audience tools.
Hmm.
And we will push forward all three of those things. We'll make them each more powerful and easier and more accessible. And so, over the next year for us, we're going to take huge strides in each of those things. And then we have platforms. Where does Universe exist? And what are the sort of horizontal levels
Right.
that exist at? And, we are going to take big swings on where Universe exists so that it's not just, on an iPhone, and it's available where everyone is. And, we are interested in new technologies around what's possible with Web3 and those kinds of ideas. We're
Nice.
interested in what we can do inside of a browser, and we're interested in you know opening up the grid system so that we're not the only developers of blocks on it.
Hmm.
So all three of those things are sort of how we think about platforms.
Got it. So I got two questions for that. Like so you mentioned you are an audience tool, like creativity tools and
Creation, commerce,
e-commerce.
audience. Yeah.
How do not so much how did you come up with those because those make sense to me as well, but how do you justify the like spreading yourself on those three areas as opposed to like why not pick one and just go 100% with just one aspect? Like how do you just explain that?
Well, what we realize it emerged through the work, right? It emerged through who our customer is and what they want, and it's how ultimately like there's like three jobs to be done. I want to represent myself, my brand, in my vision. I want to monetize my work and have a
Mm-hmm.
sustainable engine business model for it, and I want to grow. I want to grow my audience because if something isn't growing, it's dying. Um, and so that emerged organically. Like we didn't impose that. In fact, we started with just the creation pillar, and we've bolted on these other ones as we've learned that that's how we do our jobs best.
Right.
And by the way, these things feed each other. Like when you make the creative tool better, you actually make it better for stores because now they're able to merchandise their
Right.
products better. When you make the commerce tools better, then you make the creative tools more valuable because not only can you make a really awesome thing, but you can make a really awesome thing that makes you money. So
Mm-hmm.
it like gives you a license to spend time with it. So these things sort of reinforce each other, and the nature of our product is more like a portfolio of tools as opposed to a singular thing.
Got it. And you mentioned platform, so I got to ask because DriveBait is a no code mobile app builder where you can make an iOS and Android app. So I'm curious to know how you guys think of not just web but like actual native apps.
Yo, I would say that right now, most people, it doesn't make sense, in my opinion, for most people to have their own apps. Like if
Like a
you think about,
personal app, yeah.
yeah, like if you think about your usage pattern with apps, like over time you actually interface with less apps, not
Mm-hmm.
more. Um, and that's certainly true for me. But that isn't true for the amount of websites that I visit. On a given day, I might visit hundreds of new websites that I've never seen before. And that simple framework is like, okay, like we want to build tools that allow people to build in an environment where there's discovery happening and there's distribution happening.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we really start with that. It's really like, where is this valuable, right? Like, if we see that for some of our creators, there is value in having something that's more native, then we'll explore that. But it's
Mm-hmm.
not on the immediate horizon for us.
Got it.
The way that our system is designed is independent from any one platform. In other words, we store, when you're creating a grid on Universe, you're doing that in an iOS app. There's no HTML or CSS or JavaScript involved.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you view that website, it's HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we are able to take the same data and represent it in different ways.
I get that. Yeah. So we're getting close to time, and I want to get a chance to talk a little bit about you specifically. So, I saw that before Universe, you obviously have a few different experience with running companies and things like that. I'm curious to understand, like, what was essentially your trajectory? Like, what got you into tech, sorry, and specifically like on Universe, and specifically with also thoughts around like no code, which again at the time were not no code, but it was the same ideas.
Yeah, totally. So I sort of grew up on the internet. I fell in love with computers um, and the internet when I was probably 10 or so years old. Grew up in New York, and getting online exposed me to the world. And it, you know, I learned pretty early on that I wanted to play in that sandbox, and that I was really interested in the intersection of computers, uh, design and art, and business, and that creating a company would allow you to merge those three things.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Wharton undergrad, really with the intent to start a company and learn how to do that. While I was there, built a tool that replaced our school's learning management system, which is basically like the website that you use for your classes. It was pretty bad at the time, and me and my co-founders then had made an easier to use version. It was called Lore.
Mm-hmm.
It got some traction on campus. I learned about venture capital and Silicon Valley, and that I didn't need to finish school to go and build this business. And so I left after 2 years, moved to New York, built that company for a few years. We ultimately sold it. Um, and, I think persistent throughout this quest was really this idea that, like, so I am, uh, I'm not really a professional anything, right? I dropped out of school. I never had a formal job. I am not an engineer, but I am a technologist. I've sort of grown up on the internet, and I
Mm-hmm.
know how it works, and I use it all the time. And I have ideas for how it could be better, and how I want to represent myself and my work in that space. And I've never felt like there was a tool that met me where I was, that was built for me.
Mm-hmm.
A simple fact is, like, at my last company, if we wanted to make a copy edit to the website, I would need a bug and engineer to do that. And that just never made sense to me. And when I started thinking about mobile as not, oh, here's a phone, but actually here's a computer, a supercomputer that everyone on
Mm-hmm.
Earth has. It's really human. Everyone knows how to use it for the first time. Oh, wow, like, what if we turn this thing into an instrument for
Mm-hmm.
creating online? What if we broke down all the barriers between who's a designer, who's a developer, and, like, just met you where you were? Like, okay, you want to put a box there, put a box there. Like, there's no reason it needs to be more complicated than that. It's just good design, good software.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that was the real original inspiration. There were products going back to the 80s. There was a thing called HyperCard, which was a
Mm-hmm.
product that Apple built. And I was really inspired. I think this is actually an area that a lot of people have been exploring since the dawn of personal computers. And I felt like mobile presented the first opportunity to really put these ideas, on a global scale and a global stage.
Yeah. And how do you see now? So now people understand the concept of no code that you guys started without when before it was really understood. Where do you see that evolving? Do you see that it will deliver on its promise of really enabling anybody to do anything online? I'm talking even beyond universe
Yeah,
right
of
now.
course.
Um, or do you think we're going to see some consolidation, or just maybe a phase where, like, well, it turns out it just helped people who were already kind of technology kind of tech savvy into, like, doing things more efficiently, but they still maybe not a market or a willingness for other folks. Like, how do you envision the future of the evolution of no code?
If you think about creation with computers, um, or let's say if we look at code, programming, building software, ultimately the machine speaks a language, right? It's binary, right? And no humans speak that language, right? So, at the lowest levels, you've got assembly, and then you have, under that, machine code, and as you scale the ladder of abstraction, you have things, okay, let's take something like C, or then we'll go into more of a scripting language like Python, and then JavaScript, and then HTML and CSS. And as you scale that spectrum, you're getting less and less abstract, and you're getting further and further away from how the machine actually works. What are you doing? You're making it more human. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that layering is meeting the human where they are, right? And so when we talk about no code tools, we're just talking about the next layer in that stack. Of course, it's going to get less machine like. Of course, it's going
Right.
to meet the human where they are. But it's doing it in a way that is open ended as opposed to like an appliance. Because if you use an appliance is something that any human can use, right?
Hmm.
It meets the human where they are, but it has a single purpose, right? And so it's limited in what you can produce with it. The advent of no code is about bringing the general purpose nature of computing as a creative ingredient to everyone with a more human form factor. That's
Hmm.
ultimately the idea. As you scale that sort of that stack, you inherently have more defined use cases. So Notion is good for documentation and database building, and Universe is good for putting something out external into the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, even though they're both no-code tools, they're different in how they work. I think you'll continue to have that happen, that branching, that happen over time around certain core use cases, but they're coming from a place of open-endedness and composability. And so, yeah, that's how I see it. So I don't think it's ever going to go back.
Right.
I think like Excel was maybe the first no-code tool in this logic, and we've seen how much change Excel has brought into the world, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you imagine what has happened on the internet over the past 20 years and how much it has changed the world, and you understand that most of that change has been created by engineers with very esoteric skills. Think about how much change can happen when you globalize who
Right.
can actually author the internet, right? Like, it's just going to change everything, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the promise of what we're talking about.
That's not only very inspiring and very true. Definitely resonate with me. All right. Well, we at times. So I want to. I meant to ask one last thing. Do you have any no code tools or company out there that you admire or think would be good? Maybe it would be good for this live stream or just for your things you use on day to day that you like.
I think Notion's really great.
Notion.
And that's the one. I mean, like, a quick thing on Notion, like, Notion recently introduced this ability. You can copy text from one document and paste it in another document, and it will actually stay synced. So that if you change it in one place, it'll stay synced. And that idea is like called a transclusion. It's actually like an old idea. It was
Mm-hmm.
originated in like the 70s. But they're bringing these very powerful notions into, pun intended, into the world. So I'm a big fan of theirs.
No, I appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you very much. Where should people go if they want to learn more about Universe?
If they want to
What
go
should they
learn more
do?
about Universe, they should go to onuniverse.com or search the App Store, the Apple App Store for Universe. It's available on iOS, on iPad OS, and on Mac OS. And if you want to find me, my website is Cohen.space, and that will take you all the
Coin.space.
spaces that I exist on.
Sounds good. Well, again, I really want to thank you for being my guest for this second live stream. It was very generous of you to spend the time and sharing with us all the thoughts. So thank you very much, Joseph. Really appreciate it.
Great to see you.
All
Thanks
right.
for
Have
having
a
me.
good one.